or someone would ask me the other day, she's like, what are you going to do when you actually find someone really similar to you? Would you get along? I was like, gosh, no way.
Hi guys, today we're talking with Rhys. I only met Rhys recently at work, but I've had the pleasure of hearing his story and how he approaches mental health. So we invited Rhys here today to share that with you. So Rhys, could you kind of give us a quick introduction about your story and who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sam, Leroy, thanks for having me, first of all. Little bit of background. My name is Rhys Binney. I grew up in Sydney between the North Shore and the Northern Beaches, and I've lived sort of all up and down the East Coast. I've had a fairly sort of diverse career, I suppose, ranging from a small amount of time in the Australian Army, through to sort of experience in research from an academic perspective around counter-terrorism and unconventional warfare, and then I work in the business world now. I'm a sort of director within an IT research and advisory organisation where I advise executives around technology decision making. So that's a little bit of the background. I don't know how much more you want me to go into depth. We could go down a rabbit hole just there.
No, it's a good
I
overview.
mean, there's two very different worlds there. There's a world in the Defence Force and there's a world in a suit. People pick one of the two, and usually they kind of stick one way.
Yeah, I think that's true for some. For me, I didn't spend a lot of time in defence, and when I left defence, I had no interest in going into the business world. Actually, it just kind of ended up happening after a while. But you do see a lot of crossover, actually. So one of the things that I do with the organisation that I work for is I actually run their veterans program. And what you do tend to see is sometimes there are difficult transitions for people coming out of the Defence Force into the civilian sector. But there are also, an amazing array of awesome experiences where people come from that environment. They take their expertise. Sometimes that's specific expertise. So for example, if they were in signals or something like that, they've typically got fairly strong technical and communication skills, and that can be directly applied. But they also take things like the discipline, the rigor, the understanding of sort of, maintaining yourself and being well and being healthy and being able to sort of, maintain focus, pay attention to the details. And that actually often, really adds to the civilian sector. And of course, you have a number of civilians in uniform as well through things like Army Reserve and all of that. So there is more crossover than I suppose we might think at first glance.
Look, you mentioned discipline there before, and your backing from being from the Defence Force. My understanding is the discipline is like one of the top priorities. Like it's a life skill they drill into you with almost no remorse. Do you think that's put you in good stead to be really quite successful in the business world?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, my military experience was really short. And the reason for that is at the time when I was serving, I had some pretty severe mental health stuff going on that I needed to deal with, and I needed to do that outside of a military context. And it wasn't the military that caused those issues. It was actually stuff prior to that. So my experience of discipline in the Defence Force, I think for a lot of people, it's been really, really helpful. My very, very short experience in that space was that there's plenty of like angry young blokes in there. And the discipline that is enforced often helps them to, get themselves into a much, much better place. My experience with discipline is, if I'm honest with myself, as an individual, I'm terrible with discipline, or at least I have been historically. But for me, I needed to learn discipline for myself. So I kind of see discipline in two ways. You can have it enforced through some sort of hierarchical model, either with work or with the army or with sports teams, all sorts of things like that. So the external side. And then there's the discipline that you impose on yourself. So, you guys are called the 4 a.m. club. It's the discipline to get up every morning at 4 a.m., even when you feel like you want an extra couple of hours sleep and it's cold and it's rainy outside, and go and, if you're playing sport or if you're training, going and getting after that. And that, for me personally, needed to come from an internal place. I'm a fairly disagreeable person. I don't like being told what to do. And really what I needed to get to, when it came to discipline and building that for myself, was I needed to be in enough discomfort and pain around not being disciplined with the way that I live my life, to then force myself to actually learn and develop that set of skills. And I needed something, a reason to do that. And what I actually learned, there's a sort of saying from a guy called Jocko Willink. He's a former SEAL in the US. Discipline equals freedom. And, I was going through a fairly intense phase of addiction recovery when I read that kind of, when I read his book. And I actually found that was really helpful for me, because I realized that I was already applying more discipline in order to, recover from addiction to alcohol and drugs. And I was finding that the level of freedom that I got by being disciplined was actually significant. Whereas I always thought freedom came through being able to do whatever I want, whenever I want. But the reality was that if I wanted to be free in all these different areas, I actually needed to be disciplined. So if I want to be free to, get up and do a long run, or do a long swim, or, go and play with my mates' kids and be able to sort of play for a couple of hours in the pool and be fit enough and well enough to do that, I need to be disciplined around training, and resting and doing all of that on a consistent basis. So I had to learn it from that perspective, as opposed to having it, externally applied to me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Like, even in my experience with, like, uni, for example, you have your routine, you have your days. And it's like Sam and I would always discuss this. You know where you are, like on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then you can fit things around. So you have your gym. But and then as soon as holidays started, it all just went out the window. And you could be camping for like 2 days, or like just in your house for 2 days, and like awake for 2 days. And it was just like no discipline. And you just naturally felt a bit kind of low. Like, yes, you have the freedom of holidays and everything, but you just feel like you just can't really accomplish what you wanted to do, just because you don't have that set routine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, the massive amounts of free choice that we have, I consider myself to be a very, very lucky person. I grew up on Sydney's North Shore and beaches, very sort of, safe, wholesome upbringing, never had to want after meals, all that kind of stuff. But what comes with that is actually a tremendous amount of choice. And all you need to do is spend, an hour on Uber Eats, or an hour trying to work out what you want for dinner, or what you want for, entertainment that evening, to work out that sometimes all that choice is not that great. It causes a bit of anxiety and stress. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time, and I fall short of this all the time, right? But I spend quite a lot of time just trying to simplify my life back to a structured routine that works for me. And even when I go on holidays, I don't take the same routine that I have, when I'm at work, but I do try and bring a routine into that. One of the things I spend a lot of time doing is hiking, quite long distances alone in the bush. And I usually, I'll have my plan in terms of where I'm going to be most days, and, where I'm going to be on a map, and safety and all of that. But I also tend to create a structure for the day. So, there will be periods in the morning where I'm walking, where I try and put myself into a meditative state, so that I'm still getting that daily meditation practice. And I'll try and get up, at a similar time most days, and have a practice in the morning, and just have that routine. And for me, I find that incredibly beneficial, not just to, it allows me to be sort of happy, joyous, and free, if you will. It also allows me to maintain my mental fitness. I've you and I have talked about this before, Leroy, the concept of mental fitness and, discipline and routine. I've found are absolutely critical to that. And it took a certain amount of pain to teach that lesson, unfortunately. But thankfully, I'm relearning it all the time.
Yeah, you mentioned like mental fitness, and I know we talked a lot about mental health, but just for the listeners out there, could you maybe explain to us what does mental health mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of ways to look at that. I think the easiest way is to sort of just talk about my experience, because mental health is massive. It's a beast, right? And we've got everything from, depression and anxiety issues right through to, severe schizophrenia and things like that, where, there's very different sort of intervention practices, etc. And methods of control. So I can only really talk from my experience. I'm not a mental health professional by any stretch of the imagination, but my experience, I grew up, as I said, safe, happy family. My parents are still together, loving home, etc. But despite all that, I always felt pretty uncomfortable as a kid and growing up. I was a relatively, highly sensitive kid. I still had lots of friends and stuff like that, but I just never felt like I sort of fitted in anywhere. And the reality was I did fit in plenty of places. It just, that's how I felt inside of me, fairly anxious. And as I got older, I was able to hide that. I was able to wear a mask or a number of masks very efficiently and effectively. And, I was able to learn how to fit in, but I didn't feel that. When I was sort of in my probably 15, 16, I got jumped in the schoolyard and I froze. And I hated that feeling. I froze. I was able to, stop getting hit, but didn't fight back in any way. And I, disappeared off somewhere and, cried alone in a bathroom sort of. And that experience really changed something in me. And I don't know if I did it consciously or unconsciously, but then and there I sort of said, I'm just never, ever feeling that way again. And as luck would have it, about a week later, I was at a house party and there was a big incident. A number of armed guys showed up, and there was a fairly big fight. And I did the opposite. I ran into it, and I was glassed and I was hit with a pole, and I was hurt relatively bad enough to go to hospital. But from that point on, for the next 3 or 4 years, my late teens, my early 20s was just every weekend was violence. I've been knocked out a lot of times. I've nearly been killed. And there was a lot of drugs and alcohol involved in that process as well. And I got to a point where I had the symptoms of trauma that's kind of leading towards like a precursor to PTSD. And thankfully, my mum, who is a mental health nurse, recognised the early warning signs and was able to sort of broker a conversation with a psychologist so that I could get some help for that. And, those symptoms were things like I effectively didn't sleep for about 6 months. I had horrific nightmares that were so bad I just couldn't sleep. So I'd either read all night or I would drink until I passed out. And so I was able to deal with this, the surface level of some of those issues, and get the help that I required. But, I didn't address the drinking and the drug use. And over the next, number of years, that just got worse. And there were times when I got a handle on it for a moment, and then, I knew pretty early on that I was in trouble. But it wasn't until around 27 that I got to the point where I was like, I don't think I want to be here anymore. The only thing that kept me alive at that point was the fact that I didn't have what it took to kill myself. I was too scared of that. And I was just trapped in this cycle. I didn't drink every day, but I would be blackout drunk from Thursday through to sort of Sunday. I'd use a tremendous amount of cocaine and other drugs. And I was in, a lot of debt. I was still, I still had nice house, nice, motorbike, all of that kind of stuff. All of the things from the outside looked fine. Good job, 6-figure salary. But on the inside, you know, I was very near to taking my own life, and I couldn't find a way out of it. And the debt that I was in was mounting up to the point where I was quite literally considering armed robbery, while also having that kind of salary just to pay off the amount of drug debt that I had. And it was at that point where I eventually just had to ask for help again. And I had to go through a process, and I continue to go through a process today. I'm a number of years sober now. I haven't touched a drink or drug in quite some time. But I continue to need to work on the underlying stuff that caused me drugs and alcohol as a solution. You know, it wasn't that I was physically addicted to drugs and alcohol. It was the fact that I was in such a lot of mental and emotional pain that was the thing that took it away. And when that didn't work anymore and I needed to find something else because that itself had become such a big problem, I then had to spend, you know, what is effectively going to be the rest of my life working on the stuff underneath, the reasons I didn't feel like I belonged in the first place, etc. Now that's the hard part of the story, right? That's the really, you know, dark part. The light part is I was able to ask for help, and I continue to ask for help every day. And if you ask for help, you'll find it. In my experience, the actions that I take, the discipline that I sort of apply to managing my mental health and well-being doesn't just help me with the mental health challenges. It makes my life infinitely better. So whilst, you know, on the outside, things have changed a little bit, you know, in terms of I've got a better job and all of that kind of stuff, none of that is really important. What has been incredible for me is the experience of my internal life, my actual experience of life itself. And because of the way that I live now, I get to look myself in the mirror and be happy with the person who looks back, which is a rare thing for people, I think, regardless of whether they have problems with drugs and alcohol. I'm happy with who I am. I'm content in the world. I feel like I belong. And I have a very, very strong sense, not all the time, but most of the time, that regardless of what happens, everything will be okay. And I consider myself to be incredibly lucky to have that, because I think that, you know, the harshness and the extremeness of that mental health challenge that I went through, or those mental health challenges that I went and continue to go through from time to time, was in essence the luckiest thing in the world, because it forced me to change my life in a way that, you know, I can't express how grateful I am for the way that I get to live today. So yeah, that's my story with mental health. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope it does.
No, it's a very good answer. Very good answer.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that piece of you with us. You know, that's a real tough thing to do. And I mean, I say that's you're using it like a tool to be able to help people like people helped you. And, you know, I think I think you're totally right. Not many people can look in the mirror and be happy with who they are. But, you know, to be able to come through those times and be able to get there, it gives people hope, you know, they can do the same thing. So, you know, I really commend you for using the tools that you've been given through your life to be able to give people the same, you know, capacity to find that happiness in their own mirror.
Yeah, thank you. And the way I kind of see it is I'm effectively passing on an increment of what was given to me so freely, because other people, you know, hundreds of other people have done that for me, have given me that kind of help. They've shared their stories so that I didn't feel so wrong inside about mine. And, you know, I always use this little matchbox. You know, when you're a kid and you light one of the matches and then you stick it in the matchbox and it burns down and then they all go.
Yeah,
that thing.
Yeah, exactly. I see it like that, right? You know, you find this if you share your story a little bit, and you're just honest about what it was like, and, you know, what you did to get some help, and how good life can be. it allows people the freedom to do that. And, I had so many people have the courage to do that for me and teach me what that looks like, that I'm just incredibly lucky. And if I can occasionally pass that on by, having a chat with you guys or sharing about some of that stuff in a corporate environment where, most of the time we're talking about which pie looks better or which strategy, made up by multi-million dollar consultants is most effective. Sometimes being able to cut through that and just have those stories be shared, it allows people to just connect at a human level, which is something I think we all desperately need.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like just sharing that story, like people can take from that what they want and apply it in their life. And it's funny because I actually heard this quote 2 days ago. And when you were telling me, like when you were just talking then and saying like, you look at like the mirror and you're happy with yourself. The quote was, live life like everything is rigged in your favor. So yes, you went through that like challenging time, but because you went through that challenging time, you're who you are now and you're so much more stronger and you can share this. So I just had a light bulb moment. I was like, wow, okay, that's what that quote means to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all perspective, right? You can have the same exact day as someone next to you, but one person comes home and is just absolutely stoked and, kisses their wife or husband or, kid and just has had the best day. And someone else comes home and just moans and, watches Netflix and eats ice cream. And, don't get me wrong, occasionally a bit of Netflix and ice cream isn't bad, but it's not the best approach. But, that just comes down to perspective. And what I find fascinating about perspective is I've never been able to change my perspective by thinking about it, right? I was never able to be grateful for stuff just by knowing that if I had, gratitude, I would have a better life. What came first for me was the action. So at one point I spent 3 months in the morning and in the evening, and I still do this fairly frequently, writing down a list of the things that I was grateful for. And I didn't feel grateful ever for that. I felt grateful in my life before that period at all. And then I did that exercise, and this amazing thing happened. It was one morning, 3 months of doing this, begrudgingly sort of like writing and just, having temper tantrums. And then this amazing thing happened where I was like, what is this feeling going on? And it was the first time I felt gratitude for anything. And I feel that all the time now. But what I learned from that process was really simple. The action, putting in that work and having the discipline around that work comes before the feelings, before the changes. I can't think my way out of it. I'm not that smart of a guy, but I'm pretty sure that intellect doesn't help with some of this stuff. You've got to put in a bit of work. You've got to
Yeah, you just got to execute the idea. It's really interesting that you bring up that point about action. Someone we were talking to recently, a guy named Andy. He's a CEO of a couple of companies, and he's made his mark on the world, and he's talked to a lot of people trying to create businesses and form ideas. And said the difference though, people who are successful and are not, is not their idea, but it's their capacity to execute the idea. And you can have the most incredible idea think tank doing whatever they want, and then you could, but they're never going to beat someone who's an amazing executor. They don't need to have the ideas. They can come up with any kind of little idea, and if they have the drive to do it, they're going to beat this person who's just going to keep floating around the best ideas ever. And I think that rings so true with mental health fitness too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the car's not moving forward, it doesn't matter how much you turn the wheel, you're not going to change direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would agree with that. And from my work, I get to consult with some of the leading executives across this country and around the world in many respects. And I would see that the same thing is true. Those that can recognize an appropriate strategy and then act and then course correct and then keep going, they're the ones who are out in front. The people having endless conversations about conversations and never actually doing anything, they don't get very far. And it is the same in any discipline in life. You know, when I was younger and I didn't have that discipline, I would spend hours coming up with training programs for, you know, fitness or well-being and writing things out for 6 months in advance. Didn't matter if I didn't get up on Monday and do the workout. You know, you can't run a marathon on planning and Excel spreadsheets.
That's so true.
You gotta run.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I think we spend a lot of time searching for answers, right? You know, I spent a bit of time in airport, or I did spend a bit of time in airports before this year, and you go through airports and you see the books, and so many of those books are self-help, and there's nothing wrong with those books, right? But I find, you know, I see people and they've got 50 self-help books, but they're not executing on any of the ideas in them. You know, you get one book, then put that into your life and you execute on that and you execute on that again and course correct.
Do you do you find that, like, when you have an idea, you just run with it? Has that been part of your experience through living, essentially? Have you got to that point now, like you have an idea, you want to do something, you just do it, or do you still ponder and and ah about it?
Oh man, I ponder and and ah all the time, and it usually doesn't help me that much. So what I need to do is kind of create circuit breakers. So I've got a number of people that I trust who are close to me, who think like I do, who have experienced things like I have. And, you know, when I'm going around an idea 10,000 times, I typically will call those people to get some outside advice, you know, to get something just to stop that sort of circular thinking. And so that I can move forward. And the other thing I try and focus on is something called the next right action. I get my world as small as I can down to what is the next right action that I need to do. And, you know, this is great for mental fitness and mental health, right? If I'm having a shit day, I don't need to sit down and assess my job, my relationship, my family tree, and everything else. You know, that doesn't help me. What usually does is like, what's the next right thing? Okay, well, I can sit down and meditate for 10 minutes. I can do that. Maybe I can get 5. Maybe I can't do it on my own. Maybe I'll use Headspace or YouTube or something else. And then once I'm done there, I go, what's the next right thing I can do? Maybe I can take a little walk. Maybe I can not eat a pizza tonight and I can eat, you know, a salad. And I find that really practical focus is important. I still go over lots of ideas. I spend a tremendous amount of time, you know, just thinking about random stuff and ideating on things. But for me, in every discipline in life, you know, whether it's my sport and exercise, whether it's work, whether it's mental health and well-being, I need to take those ideas earlier to other people and solicit feedback from people I trust and know. So you need to develop, you know, I've had to develop those networks, and then I need to act on them, start testing them. You know, there's no point in me fleshing out an entire business plan before I've talked to the key stakeholders. There's no point in me writing up a full exercise program before I've spoken to my running coach or the person who sort of organizes my strength and conditioning stuff. It's very much, you know, humans aren't successful because we're strong individually. I mean, you know, if you think you are, go try and fight a lion or a gorilla. What makes us really successful is the fact that we can work together. And, you know, so I find that if the earlier I solicit feedback and I engage people and then I take action, the better my life runs in every facet.
Look, taking on from the running, Leroy alludes to me that you've gotten into the crazy game of endurance sports, a journey in which we're taking similar steps at the moment. You know, well, number one, we're learning that endurance sports it's as much of a mental game as it is a physical fitness game. You know, first of all, give us a little, you know, rundown on where your endurance physical career has taken you.
Yeah, sure. So I should probably preface this by don't do what I've done. Don't. There's a really bad way to get into it. But I said earlier, I've got that addict gene, and I kind of applied that holistically in this space without meaning to. But I hated endurance sports when I was a kid, right? Like we used to do a figure eight cross country, and I'd hide in the middle and then jump back into the loop at the end. And
Tactical.
You to do any race longer than 400 meters. I did hurdles and I did 100-meter sprint and stuff like that. But just anything that took more than 10 seconds, I was so not into it. I'm not built like most endurance athletes either. Like I'm pushing 95 kilos when I'm in good shape, and if I'm out of shape, it's it's a bit more than that. So I'm certainly not one of those little whippet types. But what? My first sort of experience was I started doing ocean swims. I started doing them when I was actually still drinking and stuff like that. And at that time, I wanted to do some other things as well. So I signed up to a number of marathons and half marathons, but I couldn't get my shit together. I'd train hard for a couple of days during the week and then blow it all away on the weekend. And I just couldn't get it together for the life of me. And it was really difficult. And then when I started getting sober, and particularly early on in that sobriety journey, I had a lot of anger that I needed to deal with, and I dealt with a lot of that by running. And early on, it wasn't healthy particularly. I might run in the morning and then I'd be so angry by the afternoon that I'd have to run again, which is not good for you physically, but at the time that's what I needed. And I signed up for a 100-kilometer race, and I tore my butt a bit before the race, and I was like, okay, well, that's not great. So I took some time off, and I was like, what am I going to do next? And you'd think maybe work back, don't do something as extreme. So I signed up for a 330-kilometer race across 7 days. And the longest race I'd done before that was 14 kilometers. And I've done a couple of 20K runs here and there, but I was kind of, it was the best thing I've ever done. It was insane, but it was the best thing I've ever done. Because the first day we ran about 60 Ks, and I went, all right, I've just run my first half marathon. All right, I've just run my first ultra. Then I got up the next 2 days and I ran sort of similar distance, 50 odd Ks the next couple of days. And it was on the third day of that race at about 160 Ks that I got pulled out by the medical director. I was hallucinating pretty badly. I was fairly dehydrated at that point. My body was shutting down. But I'd kind of proven to myself that I could go so much further than I thought I could. And I wasn't well trained for that at all. But it set something off inside of me, the alcohol and drugs thing, the catalyst for me to improve my life there was pain. It was just pain and misery, and I had to get away from it. What the ultra stuff started to show me was just how amazing life could be, because I went to some really, really mentally dark places on that run. And I remember this 20K stretch. I was next to this former Marine, really tough guy with himself a really tough story going on, sick kid. And we were just both in this really dark place emotionally. And, the only thing to do was keep going. And there's a difference between being in a horrendously dark place emotionally when you haven't chosen to be there, which is how I spent, 12 plus years as an addict and an alcoholic. Whereas in the ultra world, I'm actively choosing to put myself in that place so that I can keep putting one foot in front of the other and finding those mental strategies that allow me to move forward, even when everything just wants to shut down. And coming out the other side of that, I didn't finish that race, but I just got this sense of the world around me, and I realized that there is so much more out there. There's so much more opportunity. There's so much more we're individually capable of. if you're willing to go out and get after it. And, you know, that's when I started to get a lot more focus around my training. I got a coach, I got structure, I got routine. And I've still had heaps of setbacks, you know. I got a physio appointment straight after this for my knee. But, you know, I was really fit about 4 months ago, and then I came down with pneumonia. It's been 3 months, you know, just trying to recover. But all of that is easy to do now because I've got these tools that I've learned through those processes. You know, I'll wrap up here on this bit, but like the ultra stuff, for me, it comes back to people. You know, whether it's recovery, whether it's the ultra marathons, people involved in those are what make it amazing. And back to such a survival kind of based way of living in those extreme scenarios. The ability to connect is based purely on just love and service to each other. Whereas in the real world, when everything's nice and cushy and easy, there's a lot more fluff. So it's kind of why they make my life so much better.
Yeah, out there running, it's just running. You know, it's you and your buddy that, you know, may or may not come along the way, and all of a sudden the rest of the world's forgotten. It's a truly rare thing, I think.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah. Rhys, thanks so much for joining us on the show this morning. You know, it's been a real eye opener, and yeah, this has just been one of those times when I know there's no way I can go and have a bad day now. No matter what happens in this day, you're going to pick out the positives, and yeah, it's just one of those real, you know, get up and go type feelings. Like, don't make excuses for yourself. There's always a reason to go.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Rhys. I really enjoyed that bit when you said, what's the next right thing? I think I'm going to try and incorporate that everything I can in life. Just like, what's the next right thing? Just quick, simple steps just to keep on building and growing and just going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, look, the feeling's mutual. I'm so stoked to be involved. It's a real privilege. I'm really grateful that I've asked me to sort of contribute where I can. And I'm just stoked to be sort of hearing some of the 4 a.m. club. I usually listen to it on Spotify, and you know, they're great podcasts. I've got a bit of leave coming up in January, and so I'm stoked to have like a new podcast to listen to. And, and I'm going to force my girlfriend to sit in the car for like 10 hours when we're driving on the coast, and she's going to be like, "Can we listen to some music now?" I'm like, "No, I've got to get my
This is the music.
This is the music. This is all I need."
Yeah, so, no, you guys are awesome, and thanks for having me.
Cheers, no worries at all. Well, have an awesome day, and we'll be sure to catch up with you soon.
Sounds good.
All right, see you later.
See ya.